Welcome back to RotoQL University. This is our NFL strategy course, and we'll be splitting up each course by position. Today we're going to be looking at quarterbacks, specifically choosing quarterbacks for tournaments. I have Sahil here with me. Welcome, Sahil.
Yep, excited to talk about some QB selection for tournaments.
Let's do it.
So one thing we want to look at for QBs, and something that's also important for cash games, is that we're going to look at what the variance is. So QBs are generally going to give you the most dollars per fantasy point and also have the least variance. As we've talked about in the cash game deck, QBs have the ball in their hands every single play, and that's going to reduce the variance and generally increase their fantasy output. So if we look at some correlations from the 2013-2014 season to QB fantasy points per game, we can kind of get an idea of what some of the most important stats are. And what we'll see is the number of passing TDs is the most important thing. Fantasy TDs are going to give you 4 points each. They're equivalent to 100 yards. And if you really want to have a high-scoring fantasy performance, you're going to need a lot of TDs. So you want to look at teams that are going to throw in the red zone. The other things that are important, obviously, are passing yards per game, the number of pass attempts per game, and things we're going to really want to avoid are QBs. Obviously, they get sacked a lot and throw a lot of interceptions. One thing that we'll note is that rushing TDs per game is very low correlation, but it is very important to your FanDuel and DraftKings scores. But predicting rushing TDs is very difficult, and there's only a handful of QBs that you can kind of have any reasonable expectation to score a fantasy touchdown rushing. Something that we talked about in the cash game deck again, and we've seen before, is the coefficient of variation for QBs is the lowest. So we'll have the most consistency in QBs out of any of the other fantasy positions. So looking at QBs and tournament lineups, we want to really look at stacking, ownership, high team totals, and some additional factors that may be a little unique and maybe give you a little bit of an advantage. And then we'll kind of look at an example of a tournament team from last year. So stacking simply means pairing your QB with a wide receiver or tight end in a tournament because they have a high correlation with each other. Just a simple scatter plot from Jonathan Bales' book, we can see that QB and wide receiver points are very correlated. We'll see that on average, if a QB, for every additional point a QB scores, a wide receiver is going to score 0.35, 5 more fantasy points. So this is intuitive because a QB has to throw a touch. If he throws a touchdown, it has to be caught by somebody, and if he throws for 50 yards, those yards have to be caught by a wide receiver, tight end, or running back. So if we look at the Millionaire Maker results, which are the biggest tournaments on DraftKings from the 2015 season, and we look at the top 10 lineups, we'll see that QB wide receivers are the predominant combination. We'll see QB and tight ends paired together, and we'll see some QBs that aren't stacked with anybody. I don't recommend doing that unless it's a QB like a Tyrod Taylor or maybe even a Cam Newton who you can expect to have a rushing TD at some reasonable frequency. But for the most part, you really want to focus on pairing your QB with a wide receiver or a tight end. And then we can take a look at the same thing on FanDuel. We'll see that QB wide receiver is stacked again at the highest frequency, and we'll see that naked QB is and naked QB means that there is no stack with that QB, so there's no wide receiver or tight end with it. And we'll see that that is more frequent on FanDuel, and that is because of their scoring system not being PPR. So QB ownership is something that's important in tournaments, especially with these gigantic tournaments. You want to kind of get QBs that are a little less owned and may not be as chalky. Vegas data, rightfully so, is the biggest impact on QB ownership, and combined with soft matchups, you're going to see that those QBs who have the best matchups are going to be highest owned, and that's obviously not surprising, but maybe in a tournament you want to pick a QB in a little tougher matchup. And again, value, so if a QB is underowned or underpriced, they're going to be higher owned. And the QL Wire content we have, which aggregates a bunch of different articles from everybody in the industry, QBs that are mentioned frequently there, and those are going to be probably the result of a combination of the first three factors. Those QBs are obviously going to be higher owned. So this is just an example from a week in the 2014 season to kind of give you an idea of what the distribution of ownership looks like. Since QBs are only in one roster spot on both FanDuel and DraftKings, there's going to be a lot of varied ownership. You're not going to frequently see QBs owned above 20% or 25%, which you may see from chalky running back and wide receivers. So we'll see that the highest QB owned is Eli Manning, and he is at a price point that is affordable, and he had a great matchup this week, but still his ownership was only around 15%. Drew Brees and Ben Roethlisberger, both very high owned as well, and those were because of their plus matchups. Given this is just only 1 week, we're not going to draw too many conclusions. But you can see that outside the top three, there aren't too many QBs that are very high owned. So let's take a look at a tournament lineup example. This is from last year, and this is a team that performed pretty well. And we can see that started with Big Ben, who wasn't a good matchup against the Colts. And you can see that he got 4 TDs, a 2-point conversion, and those 4 TDs are the reason why he got a big fantasy score. And we'll see that we also paired him with Antonio Brown. So his Antonio Brown and Ben Ben combination, they got 2 TDs, which is necessary if you want to place highly. And since those 2 TDs came from Big Ben, 2 of the TDs from Big Ben went to Antonio Brown, we're getting double the fantasy points there. So each of those is worth 10 fantasy points, whereas if we kept them separate, you're not going to benefit from that great performance by both of them. So we have some more resources here if you want to learn some more, how you can learn more about DFS strategy, and more how you can learn about how to use RotoQL to help you construct winning lineups. So you can check out our videos at the Zendesk that tell you about how to use RotoQL. You can feel free to reach out to us with any questions you have. And you can definitely check out RotoQL University or RotoU, which has all our strategy videos for all sports and a lot coming for football.